The world of dentistry is rapidly evolving, and the shift from traditional to digital workflows can be daunting. At the Institute of Digital Dentistry, we're committed to demystifying this transition through our podcast, Digital Dentistry Decoded. We bring insights from global digital dentistry leaders directly to you, helping you stay ahead in this ever-changing field. Digital workflows are advancing by leaps and bounds across all of dentistry. This is Digital Dentistry Decoded, and I'm your host, Dr. Ahmad Al-Hassiny, exploring innovations on the frontier of digital dentistry. In this episode, we're breaking molds and tracking the 3D printing revolution with Corey Lambertson, General Manager of Americas for 3D printing leader, Asiga. With years at the helm of his family's dental lab before joining Asiga, Corey has seen the shifts up close and personal. Tune in as we decode hype from hope, peek into the material pipeline fueling functionality to drive adoption, and glimpse what surprises the future may hold. From production floor insights to real-world implementation, Corey lays bare the practical promise and persistent limitation shaping uptake. This is your insider look at the tools and innovations driving the digital conversation in this ever-evolving world of dentistry. Dr. Ahmad Al-Hassiny here, and we're very fortunate to have Corey Lambertson with us. Hey, Corey, how you doing?
Pretty good, Doctor. How are you?
Very well, very well. I really appreciate you taking the time out to talk to us today. And just so the audience gets to know you a little bit, can you just let us know, I know personally that you work for Asiga, but please just introduce yourself and let us know a little bit about your background and what you do with the company.
Sure, absolutely. My name's Corey Lambertson. I'm the General Manager for the Americas for Asiga. I'm based out of Michigan in the United States. And a little bit of my background, I actually came from the dental laboratory industry. So my dad owned a dental lab when I was growing up. And so I grew up around the dental lab space. And after I graduated from college, he actually hired me on to convert his lab from a analog dental lab to a digital dental lab. And so we brought on 3Shape, brought on some 3D printers. And that's kind of actually where I got to dive into 3D printing. And then I went into corporate dentistry by working for a reseller that sold digital products like 3Shape scanners and the Asiga 3D printers and roll and milling machines, for example. And so I got to dive into the corporate side of what it takes to sell and support and train individuals on products. And I got a job offer at Asiga, and so I couldn't really turn that down. And I've been at Asiga for about 2 years now.
Awesome, man. You got a rich history all the way from working in a dental lab, like you say. And so when did your dad digitize? He must have been pretty early adopter.
Yeah, so it was actually in, let's see, it would have been probably, I think it was like 2012, 2011 is when he really started to go digital. And so I guess not super early, but earlier than most labs. Yeah, absolutely.
Wow, awesome. Good on him, man. We've been talking to a number of experts in the industry, and it's funny, you always hear that the labs are digitizing much faster than the dentists, and this kind of sings true yet again.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. And it's honestly, I think it's because of the influx of clinicians taking on the intraoral scanner. When we look at just going digital in general, the labs kind of are forced to go digital in some sort of way. You can pour up a traditional impression, but as more and more clinicians take on digital scanners, it almost forces the laboratories to go digital, which honestly, it's not a bad thing because just the overall productivity and accuracy and performance that you get from the restorations are just phenomenal compared to just analog produced restorations.
Yeah, man. No doubt. People say it's the future, but it's just here. It's the now. There's so many advantages. So about the printing game, so how's it been in the USA? If you reflect, think you've been with Asiga for about 2-3 years and as a GM in America, which is the largest, digital dentistry kind of market in the globe. So how's the 3D printing game? What are some of your observations over the past few years? I assume you supply both labs and clinicians?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's both laboratories and clinicians are taking on 3D printers. And so the main game are the main companies that really are taking it on first or took it on first were the dental laboratories. And then now we see it we're almost like in a paradigm shift or a pivoting point where the clinicians are starting to take it on. And the clinicians want to take it on so they can produce like those low hanging fruit indications. And when I say low hanging fruit, I mean, it's like the Splints and the surgical guides, and some are dipping into digital dentures today even. And there's so many simple applications that clinicians can use a 3D printer for that it just makes sense that they produce some things in-house. But it's going to be on both worlds. There's going to be a 3D printer in a clinical office and in a laboratory. And it's one of those things that it's here to stay. And we do see that growth moving towards the clinical aspect, but it'll be used similarly, but different compared to what a dental lab will use it for.
Yeah, totally agree. So you work for Asiga, and I'm based in New Zealand, and so Asiga has a warm spot in my heart, being an Australian company. I mean, even though I'm New Zealander, we kind of see them as like a big brother. And I've heard so many great things. I mean, I use an Asiga Max UV printer. Is that kind of the most common thing that you guys are selling? Are they the most popular in your kind of portfolio for dentists and labs?
Across the board, yeah. The Asiga Max is the most popular machine that we sell. And it really comes down to the price point and the footprint that it fits in. I mean, since you have the Asiga Max, and if you have other brands of 3D printers, the Asiga Max is so compact. You can literally place it anywhere. It's not like you need to clear out space or, shift your room around to be able to fit in an Asiga Max. So you can literally place it anywhere. And the price point and just the overall footprint that you get with that machine, it's being gobbled up by labs and clinicians. And then of course, we'll probably tie into the technology later, but just the sheer fact that both systems are open material, the Pro 4K and the Max, it just fits everywhere. The Pro 4K is still a phenomenal machine. So that you referenced the Asiga Max, but the Pro 4K is I call it the younger, bigger brother, because we launched it 2 years after the Max. But it's just the big brother. It's 3 times the volume, 3 times the build platform size. It's meant for large production scale laboratories. It's a phenomenal machine too, but it comes at a higher price point, and it's harder to place in any location because it's on wheels, and it's not something you can put on a desktop. Just general rule of thumb of taking on a product, it's a lot easier for somebody to take on something that costs less and can fit anywhere.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, the Asiga Max, for anyone who may not know, but I assume most people listening to this are quite switched on in the digital dentistry space. But for those of you who don't know, I would just recommend you just Google Asiga Max, and it is quite an incredible machine. It's quite incredible how compact it is and what it achieves. I mean, definitely with a dental clinic in mind, I think, even though it is sold, I believe, to jewelers and stuff. Correct me if I'm wrong, but this machine is just super reliable. I really enjoy it in my practice. So, I mean, apart from gushing over the Asiga printer, I'd love to hear, because you've been in the game for a long time, especially from your early phase in the dental lab space and now working for a dental company, let's say. What are some of the thoughts that you have around the changes that have been happening in dentistry, as you've observed them in the last 10, 15 years?
Absolutely. When we look at just like changes in 3D printing in general, when we first started, the reason that we bought a 3D printer at the dental lab was to print wax to cast it. And just overall, like casting metal and doing that lost wax burnout technique and investing for casting, that's something that most labs really aren't doing anymore because of the advancements of zirconia, right? And even the advancements of some of the high performance ceramic polymers that you can 3D print, right? And those keep getting better and better. But when we first got into 3D printing, the main purpose for it was really to print like a wax coping or a wax full contour crown or bridge, and then we would invest it, cast it, and the way we go. And then it started to shift again, right? It shifted towards everybody just needed a 3D printer to print models. And that really happened because of the intraoral scan boom. And that's still happening, right? And more clinicians are taking on the intraoral scanners. So there's going to be a need for that physical model somewhere. And the only way to get that is through 3D printing. Well, I guess technically you could mill a model, but nobody's going to tie up their $50,000 mill to mill out a model when you can just simply 3D print it.
And also the geometry would be pretty tricky to mill out.
It would. You wouldn't be able to create like the detail that you can with 3D printing because of the undercuts of the model. But yeah, after I went from castables to printing models, and printing models still a large part of the work that 3D printers are doing today. Now we're starting to see that transition of, well, let's 3D print our splints, or let's 3D print our surgical guides. Let's 3D print our custom trays. Let's 3D print our dentures. Let's 3D print our try-in dentures. Shoot, why not, right? And there's just about almost every application or indication you want to print, you can 3D print it today. And it's pretty amazing. It's really limitless. Even like if you're an orthodontist, you can even 3D print your bracket transfer guides to be able to place your brackets accurately on your patient for treatment planning for orthodontics. And it's just amazing.
I totally agree. I mean, one thing that's really, because I've been a dentist for about close to 8 years now. And even in that short period, I mean, my father, I'm similar to you, have a family in the kind of dental game. My father was a dentist for 20, 30 years, something like that. And he was one of the first to get a scanner in New Zealand. And this was about 11, 12 years ago, probably similar to when your dad was digitizing. And I have to agree, it's just crazy to see the influx of digital equipment, like especially in the past 5 years, I would say it's really boomed. And I'm hearing figures as high as 80, 90% of labs in the US are digitized, which is kind of mind blowing, and up to 40, 50% of dentists. And so totally, I mean, as clinicians and labs keep pushing this technology, we're seeing more and more people print stuff. And it is a very interesting topic. And what I'd love to pick your brain about is, kind of separating what you think may be the really hype stuff where a lot of people are talking about it, but in reality, not many people will do it, versus the clear cut, this is why you should get a printer. And I think you already alluded on some of those things where if you need a model and you have a scanner, a printer is the only way to do it. It's really clear cut. Similar to like a surgical guide, like a surgical guide. I think most labs are printing them now because it just beats out milling them. But it's funny, and we'll get into it later in the convo about restorations and dentures. I think that's a really big topic. One thing I'm curious to hear is, you mentioned like a lot of the labs investing for metal work and all that sort of stuff. Do you think the days of like artisan labs that are doing everything handmade and layering are kind of numbered with modern technology? Do you think it's just the way of the time, or will we always have a place for those sort of labs?
Oh man, boutique. I call them boutique labs. So you call them artisan labs. I'm going to call them a boutique dental lab. They'll never go away. They will transition to digital. Those boutique labs or artisan labs, usually it's like that 1 to 5 person laboratory, right? And you pay for what you get. And you do get a better aesthetic or a higher aesthetic crown from a boutique lab than you may from a large scale production lab. I'm not sure what the going rate is for a crown, for example, in New Zealand is, but maybe at one lab you may pay $50, $60, $70, and another lab you may pay $200 for a zirconia crown. But how much chair time you're spending adjusting and really fine tuning any aesthetics after the fact, that's where I think you'll appreciate the boutique lab. But boutique labs and the artisan labs, they're not going to go away. They're slowly digitizing. And so I know a few like master ceramists in the States that have multiple Asiga 3D printers, and they have their 3Shape scanning systems, and they have milling machines, and they specialize in those high-end, high aesthetic cases, but they do it digitally, and they will cut it back digitally, and then they'll layer porcelain in a traditional fashion, and it comes out beautiful. But it won't go away. In fact, it extends their life in the business just because it's easier on their hands, easier on their eyes. I think you'll see more and more boutique labs become more popular in time versus dwindling away. Because I think there's like a transition where the small labs were just not deteriorating, but going away. And then the big labs are becoming more and more dominant. We'll see a transition where it will shift, and you'll see more and more boutique labs that are willing to specialize and go the extra mile to build that high aesthetic case.
And I think it's quite interesting what you said, actually, and it's the utilization of the digital tools. It's across the board. And in a way, I think for these boutique labs, as you put them, is that the digital tools almost make their life easier. I mean, you're still getting the layering and stuff, but, when you can cut back digitally, it's so much better. in my opinion. You get such a more uniform cutback.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And
I was just going to say, I do have a soft spot for the boutique labs, because that's what the lab was that I grew up in. My dad's lab was a boutique lab. And so it's fantastic to see the boutique labs, make I don't want to say make a comeback, but they stay alive and they go digital, and then they end up loving work again.
That's awesome to see, man. Yeah, they're holding the fort against all the kind of the corporate nature of what's going on in dentistry across the board. Swinging back to, I guess, Asiga and the company you work for, I know you guys have been releasing some interesting things. I mean, Asiga to me is a very interesting printer company, because some of the other market leaders like Sprint Ray are really doubling down on resins and the type of resin and build platforms and the crown kit. And one thing that was kind of really interesting that you guys released is the Ultra Gloss tray. The Ultra Gloss tray is one of those things where I don't think many people would have thought you could innovate on the printing tray, and then it made a huge difference. Can you elaborate a little bit about the tray and how you guys have found it?
Yeah, absolutely. So the tray itself was actually the kind of the child of our doctor that runs our office in Germany. And so just a little bit of, I guess, background or geography for Asiga. We have our head office in Sydney, and then we have our office in the US, but then we also have a technical office in Germany. And so in Germany, that's where all the third-party resins are validated. And then also a lot of our, I guess, creativeness comes from as well. And so there's a gentleman out there, and he actually developed the tray. And so he was just playing with different materials, and he came up with this concept, I believe it was like 3 or 4 years ago. And it just took some time to really make it perfect, and as close to perfect as what we can get. And so he found, playing with a couple different membrane styles, he was able to create a gloss effect during the printing process. And it's actually quite amazing what it does do. And the tray, like anybody can go out and buy a tray, an ultra gloss tray, and you can see, but it's got a matte surface on the bottom. And so when light hits it, it refracts the light ever so slightly, and it creates a polished perimeter of the slice that it's creating. It's actually quite amazing. I actually printed 15 splints this week. I'm going to a trade show this Saturday, and so I wanted to have some extra ultra gloss splints on hand just to show them off. And it's just phenomenal what it does. It takes a splint or just about any clear material, and it makes it perfectly polished to give it a perfectly transparent look to it. It almost looks as if it was a milled splint. And so when we look at digital splints and being how they were fabricated, when 3D printed splints came out, they're being compared directly against milled splints. And everybody loved the milled splints because they were perfectly transparent. And now with 3D printing a splint on an Asiga using the Ultra Gloss build tray, you get a perfectly transparent splint. And it's phenomenal. You print, you wash, you cure with almost zero extra post-finishing. One of the biggest, I guess, pains of printing splints is that you have to remove the supports, and then you have to polish and pumice and polish. And it takes a long time just to be able to get like that perfect lustered splint. And with the Ultra Gloss tray, it takes away that manual labor aspect, and you can literally print, wash, and cure, and you have a splint that's good to go. Have you tried playing with the Ultra Gloss trays yet?
Yeah, I actually have, and I was kind of blown away, to be honest, because it's just one of those things where you're like, they innovated on the build tray. Like, who would have thought? All the talk is about new resins, and coming up with this, I don't know any other company that has an Ultra Gloss tray.
Yeah, and it's just one of those things that it's like, after you use it, it's just so obvious. Like, why hasn't this been thought of years ago? When you think of DLP 3D printing that's been around for quite some time, why didn't anybody think of this 10 years ago, 15 years ago? It's actually quite amazing that it's just one of those things that was just so obvious that nobody, I don't think, really ever thought about it. And luckily, we thought about it first, right?
I guess for the audience who may not understand or may not be familiar with printing, if I may, Corey, this Ultra Gloss tray is just basically a special tray that you put your resin in, just like all your other resin trays. It just gives you a shiny print for a clear material. And the primary driver to have this shiny, clear material is, like Corey said, splints, because your printed splints would come out not shiny. I mean, a lot of people were doing all sorts of, post-processing hacks like the candy coating technique. And if you want to know what that is, just YouTube it. IDD made a video about it. But there was all these little tricks that you were doing post-processing to get a shiny splint because, as Corey said, people just wanted a shiny splint. And I think even your patients would probably prefer a shiny splint. And so just with this tray, it prints them out shiny. And from my understanding, it really is just for splints. I mean, not really for any other indication. Is that correct?
Yeah, that was the main driver for developing it because we needed to have that perfect indication or perfect application for the tray. And really, splints are the perfect application for the tray. I have printed surgical guides in it, and they came out fine. They came out accurate, and they came out perfectly clear. And so if you remember when surgical guides were popular for 3D printing, one of the biggest gripes was that everybody wanted them transparent, which is insane because they don't need to be transparent. I mean, really, a surgical guide is just made to punch a hole, right, and drill a hole and place an implant. But you didn't need it to be transparent. You had little window cutouts where you could see if it was actually truly seated down before you would start drilling. And so it didn't need to be clear, but it works well with that. And then something I've started playing with is playing with some of the denture resins to see how they print and react with the ultra gloss trays. And so I've found that with materials that do not have any sort of ceramic or glass filler in it, it will create a polish effect. If it does have a glass filler in it, it doesn't really have the same effect that you would have, for example, with like the ultra gloss tray, like you do with like Splints. But I did use, for example, our Denta Tri, which is our denture tri material. I printed a set of tri and dentures with the ultra gloss tray, and it came out perfectly polished. And so technically all you'd have to do is just print, wash, and cure. Remove your supports, of course, use a little fiber wheel to remove some of the scarring of the supports, but it would be almost perfectly polished, and you could deliver to your patient for a tri-and denture, and they could actually have a gloss effect versus like a matte finish tri-and denture. But the denture-based resins, I think, is something that would be really exciting to continue to try on the trays, and even like denture teeth, for example. Imagine if you could 3D print a denture and not have to polish it or not have to put any sort of lacquer or coating on it, and it's perfectly polished. That would be really cool.
Yeah, that'd be a game changer. And that's what I love about 3D printing is like every 3 to 6 months, we seem to have more and more innovation, and everyone's trying to solve these problems. It's like a really, really fast moving field currently.
It is.
I guess speaking of splints and something you alluded to before, and I actually did a 3D printing review with a bunch of colleagues in Australia and New Zealand who are kind of KOLs in the printing space, and we reviewed all the different printers that we have available. And you can check that out on our website at instituteofdigitaldentistry.com. And one of the main advantages, like you said, of Asiga is that it's open. I believe it's the most open printer. You literally have like over 400 or 500 different resins available to you. And would you agree these days that printing is a resin game? Like this is really what's differentiating printers?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can get into the nitty gritty with the technology itself. And like, for example, the Asiga Max, when we released it, it was way ahead of its time, and it's still pretty far advanced compared to other printers on the market. I mean, we have on the hardware technology itself, we use a 385 nanometer light source projector, which allows us to print clear materials accurately, but also allows us to print different chemistries accurately. So for example, we're one of 2 printer companies that have the Lucitone denture base and denture tooth resin and tri-and denture resin validated on our system. And the reason is because we're only one of 2 printers that's manufactured in the world that can print it accurately.
Sorry, would the other one be Prime Print?
Actually, no. Believe it or not, the Prime Print does not have the Lucitone material validated on it.
Which one's the other printer that has Lucitone?
Carbon. So Carbon's the only other company that has the Lucitone validation. Carbon and Asiga. I mean, they launched with Carbon initially, and so they had their exclusive rights to it. And then as time goes on, but that naturally opens up, right? It makes sense as a business model to make your resin work in as many 3D printers as you can, especially if you're manufacturing resin. But the UV light source that we use is different compared to other printer manufacturers. And so we're able to print clear materials accurately and tap into different chemistries and print those accurately. And then also we have the pressure sensing technology that allows us to monitor every layer thickness and making sure that we're reaching a true layer thickness before exposing light. And we have our internal radiometer that measures the light output instantly and automatically calculates and calibrates the exposure time for every layer before it exposes. These are like simple things that I'd probably take for granted, but it's these things that make the machines so precise and so accurate. So I did read through your study, and then there was another study that was released shortly after that actually compared majority of those printers, but from an accuracy standpoint. And from an accuracy standpoint, and this is comparing machines that cost $5,000 up to machines that cost a few $100,000 machines, or a few $100,000. And the Asiga machine that was chosen for the study was the Pro 4K 80 UV. And it was actually the most accurate machine out of all the machines that they tested. And it had the closest deviation range across the different models that they produced and compared. And so we were actually the closest 3D printer to produce a model that was almost identical to a stone cast. And everybody else was significantly further away. I'm out to find that study. I'll send it over to you. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, please do. I'd love to have it as a link for anyone who wants to read it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm out to find out. It's one of those paid for studies, I think, right now, because it just came out. But you can get like the synopsis of it for free. And then if you want to read the whole study, then you can buy it. But from the outside of the hardware standpoint, besides the small things that make every company unique, then the next game is the chemistry resin game. Absolutely. And I think the only way to really survive in this game is to produce a printer that can accept them all. You did say that we're an open 3D printer, and that's absolutely correct, but we're one of the only truly open 3D printers in the dental market. And when I say truly open, I mean, you can print any resin from any manufacturer without any limitations, without any fees, without any unlocking needed. We'll validate any material in our system, and we do that. There's over 500 published on our website, but we actually probably have a catalog of over 750 materials that you can actually get that we haven't published. And so it's pretty amazing to see all the different resin that you can use, and anything from permanent crowns to temporary crowns to clear aligners, like directly printing aligners, to really, you name it, there's a material for it that you can print on in Asiga.
Yeah, I totally agree. And the fact that I like what you said, that these days, I think any printer company to survive will eventually have to open up, or at least start playing friendly with all these different resin manufacturers. It's a bit like the intraoral scanner days. Initially, they were all closed off. You remember when a CEREC wouldn't even allow you to export an STL? And now, just because of market pressure, everyone is open. And I think something similar will have to happen with printers. On the topic of materials, although I love the technical stuff, a lot of dentists out there, maybe not the labs, because the labs usually are very technical, but the dentists oftentimes, they really don't get into the nitty gritty of all of this. They just want to know, how do I make it work? How do I delegate it? Is it easy to use, etc.? And for those people, having 700 resins is cool, but in reality, they're going to use 5 or 6 maximum. And I'd love to pick your brain. There's always standout resins, you're kind of like your golden bullet for the indication. And models are models. I really like the Asiga model resin. I think it looks amazing. But at the end of the day, models are models, right? I think the key resins are the ones that go into people's mouths. And you alluded to surgical guides. It doesn't really matter. It's just a guide with a hole in it. You drill through it and then you throw it away. So even then, it's less important. What about the splint game? Do you still agree that Keystone Soft by Keystone Industries is kind of the gold standard now and used as kind of the benchmark for printed splints?
Yeah, absolutely. The KeySplint Soft, it's a fantastic material. Keystone did a great job marketing the material. It's available to use on our printer, and I think everybody's printer at this point. And it's just a fantastic material. And I would say it's the gold standard for splints. Now, I was just at a convention last week, and I did hear of a couple new materials coming out from a manufacturer. I can't say who, but what they're looking to do is actually pretty revolutionary in the way that they're treating the splint game. Right when you think that it can't get any better, it can.
You're keeping us on the edge of our toes.
Yeah, no, I can't. I honestly can't. In fact, I found out because there was a doctor that was a key opinion leader for this company, and he accidentally slipped up and said something out loud. And so I just happened to be at the right place at the right time type situation. But really so like Soft splints are the most popular splints, I think, to 3D print. And a lot of people want a hard splint, but they have issues with overall comfort and fitment in 3D printing. And usually there's some extra adjustments you have to make.
Anyone who's tried them, I've tried them in my own mouth, and they're just too rigid. It hurts. It really does. It hurts to put them on.
Exactly. And so this company has cracked that code, is what I'm going to say. They have a new formula that allows, I can't go into it, but essentially there'll be a hard splint out there, a hard splint material out there that will actually be comfortable to wear from 3D printing. And it's pretty amazing what they're doing with it. But yeah, right now I think Keystone definitely has the market corner, but there's companies like Boco and Prothesia, Dentona, multiple companies that have soft splints available and hard splints available. But really Keystone was really the first one to bring it to market and market it well to give it the traction that it is today. And they really have the market cornered on it.
And your dad runs a lab and you're involved with it at the very least somewhat these days. So when you, in your opinion, like we have a lab as well, we're about 50-50 right now. We're still milling some splints or doing, thermoform suck downs, and we're printing about 50% of them. In your opinion, for those listening, do you really see this KeySplint soft being, a good replacement for a traditional splint? Do you really see it being that way? You can, stand by this product, and those who are really considering printing splints, you can easily recommend that for them?
Absolutely. So I know there's a company in the US here that produces 1,000 splints a week that's 3D printed only. And it's phenomenal what they're doing. And they wouldn't be doing it if it didn't work, and if it wouldn't work for a wide range of patients. And so producing a splint digitally with 3D printing, it's here and it's here to stay. And it's something that I think is probably suited for most patients and most applications, unless there's a limitation with the BDO. And let's say they can't actually design a splint to proper thickness. Because remember, we are playing within limitations of what a 3D printer can produce and what the material can withstand. And so if you don't have the proper opening for the splint, or if you can't go thick enough, then milling a splint or doing a vacuum formation of a splint may be the option that you have to go by force. But I would say probably 90% of the patients could use a 3D printed splint.
That's incredible. I mean, for anyone who's on the fence, you heard it there, 1,000 splints a week by a lab, and if they're printing them, it has to work. And I also agree with that sentiment. I think printing splints is one of those things that is established. It works. Then comes the other things that I'd love to pick your brain about is, dentures. You mentioned dentures a couple of times. I've personally printed a lot of dentures in our lab, and for interim dentures, we still print them. It's an amazing workflow. But for long-term dentures, what we're finding is that some of them are still fracturing. And you can't do a blanket statement across the entire industry, because it really depends on your printer, your post-processing, even which resin you're using out of the literal hundreds out there. But, what's your general sentiments with denture printing? We personally went back to milling Ivotion for our permanent dentures, but is it one of those things that you're seeing in the market that's there for long-term dentures, or is it still kind of a try-and denture phase, interim denture, throwaway sort of thing, maybe immediate dentures, etc.?
No, it's a permanent at this point in time. But it comes down to the resin that you're using, right? And so we've talked about, the resin continues to unlock applications, but not just unlock applications. As the resin chemistries continue to evolve, the application or indication keeps getting more and more durable and resistant to staining or fracturing. I think right now, I don't play favorites, but one of the most popular materials for printing dentures is the Lucitone, Dentsply Lucitone resin for the denture base. They have the IPN denture tooth resin, and then they have their economy tooth and Trian resin. And that is probably the strongest material for 3D printing a denture to date that I've been able to play with. And I've produced a couple dentures on our printer at the office and post-processed it properly, and I've thrown it across the room and it didn't fracture. Whereas most cases for even a traditionally formed denture, if you drop it from waist height, you're definitely, gasping for a second, like, please don't break, please don't break. And it's pretty amazing to see what some of these high impact resistant materials are able to achieve. But it does come down to the chemistry. Now, I did hear an interesting fact. I was on a call with a material manufacturer, and they're producing a definitive or a final restoration material. And they found with printing on our systems and paired with one of the high performance curing units that's on the market, they're able to achieve a increase of strength of 30% over competitive 3D printers and their associated curing units. And it comes down to that wavelength of light that comes from the printer and then tying in with a proper post-curing unit. And so I think a lot of people, they see an ecosystem and they see a material and they think just because that ecosystem can print this material, they're going to yield the same result from that system than they could from an Asiga system. And it's not true. The studies have proven that with printing on most materials on an Asiga, you do yield a higher strength coefficient with the materials. And depending on what you're looking for, that's maybe what you need. And so it was pretty interesting to see that was actually true.
Well, you mentioned the workflow, but I feel like that's one of the kind of, at the moment, disadvantages of an Asiga system, because I know you guys produce you sell the light curing unit, but as a company, you don't actually sell a wash and a cure yet for dentists. Oftentimes it's bundled with a third-party product, and I feel like that's kind of the glaring missing piece for the Asiga. Like even for Lucitone, for those who don't know, that if you want to print Lucitone on your Asiga, you have to buy the recommended light curing box by Dentsply Sirona to cure it properly. What are your thoughts? Is it something that you guys are thinking about to offer the whole post-processing?
Absolutely. We'll have a full ecosystem and make sure that's validated for the spectrum of materials that are already validated on our system. And so originally when 3D printing was, I guess, booming in the dental industry, the device they used for washing the parts was something that every dental lab had, which is an ultrasonic cleaner. And now an ultrasonic cleaner in a dental lab is used different than an ultrasonic cleaner at a clinical office. And so you'd have to get a separate ultrasonic cleaner. That's only a couple $100s. And we actually still even recommend just getting an ultrasonic cleaner and have a little container with IPA alcohol inside of the ultrasonic cleaner that's submerged with water and wash your parts in that. And it does an excellent job. That's what I use at my office. And you're able to save quite a bit of coin on something that's very basic and simple, just to wash some parts. And the post-curing is always dictated by the material manufacturer. And so the material manufacturer is who's going to dictate what cure unit you should be using. They're the company that's going through and testing biocompatibility and doing the cytotoxicity test and determining, which cure units make the cut and do not make the cut, right? And so that's where we left it at, because it being an open material 3D printer, it's hard to produce one cure unit that would fit them all with the technology that was available then. But I think we'll have something that will be pretty amazing for everybody.
Good to hear. And like I say, it's really the only kind of thing that's missing in the Asiga ecosystem. Yeah. We talked about dentures, we talked about splints. I think the other thing is restorations. And boy, there's a lot of hype about printing restorations. Again, what are your thoughts? You have a lab, obviously. I'm of the opinion that this notion that printers are just going to replace milling machines, I don't agree with that. To be honest, I think they're more complementary devices, and I think any modern lab or clinic will have both. But of course, you're in the United States, you obviously see all the marketing that's going on around you. I think the US is probably the loudest and hardest about printing ceramic restorations. What are your thoughts, man? I have printed a few rehabs. I've printed a number of inlays, onlays. When you have a CEREC in office like I do, it just makes you scratch your head why, if it's a single unit, you wouldn't just mill it. It's roughly the same time. It's a much stronger material. But, what are you seeing in the printing restoration space? Like I said, love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, so I think I'm on the same page with you. 3D printing is not going to replace the milling machine, at least not this year, not next year, and I don't think in 5 years. Now, if you look at zirconia when it first came out, it was okay. There weren't really any studies backing it. It was, people were leery. Did they want to use it? And a lot of people were like, I'm never going to use a zirconia crown today. I'm never going to produce a zirconia crown today. Or then. And now today, majority of people are producing zirconia crowns because the material got stronger, got more translucent, it got gradient shade, and so on and so forth. The material evolved, right? So you could produce it and mill it out and have an effective restoration. And I think we're seeing that same transition with 3D printing crowns. And so the chemistries of the resin are continuing to evolve. There's not to me, I feel there's not enough studies yet for any material from any manufacturer yet to say that this is a long-term permanent restoration, right? And you probably feel the same way, that until you see the studies behind it and the backing and really have that foundation for it, and the chemistries will continue to evolve during that time period, I think we'll eventually see some really good permanent crown materials. And there are some really good ones today, but if you compare them directly to zirconia, it's not going to be the same. Maybe if you compare it to like Empress, for example, then you're getting close to that.
I guess that's the issue, because you're comparing a resin fundamentally to a ceramic, and it's just a different beast.
Yeah, it is. But I think it'll eventually continue to get better.
Yeah, no doubt. And I'm totally not ruling out printing. It's like you say, before Emacs, no one would have thought of using a lithium disilicate as widely as we did. So it's one of those things where if the material science gets so good and a company just releases that kind of perfect material, kind of like what Emacs did to PFM or what zirconia did to PFM and all the metals we were doing, I think that would just completely change the game. One thing, though, that I don't think is discussed enough, because you see a lot online, you can print a crown in 10 minutes and 15 minutes and et cetera, but I think a lot of people don't realize the post-processing actually takes not a significant amount of time, but it's something that's totally overlooked. I really don't buy the fact that the average dentist can design a crown within 15 minutes without some really good training, especially when they're starting off. And I think it's just a lot of it is good marketing, but I feel like dentists just need to understand the entire workflow. When you actually sit in a clinic and watch them do it, you're like, the printer doesn't magically print a crown and it's ready for the mouth.
Yeah, no, it starts at the patient, and then you pick up the patient's oral cavity with the intraoral scanner, and then you have to go through and design it. And, since I grew up in the lab, I've always wanted to check my crowns on a model, right? And so if you have a patient there, then you can check it directly on the patient, but you're still going to have to, after it's done printing, let's say if you print it in 15 minutes, you're still going to have to wash it. Maybe that takes 5 minutes of washing, 10 minutes maybe. Then you have to post-cure it. So depending on the material, maybe that takes 2 minutes to cure. Maybe it takes 20 minutes to cure. And then it's just a crown at that point. You still need to go ahead and put some sort of luster to it, whether you're going to polish it with like a little rubber wheel, or if you're going to actually put a glaze on it and stain it. And there are light cure composites for that will do a pretty good job. But when people say like, oh, you got a crown in 15 minutes. No, you don't have a crown in 15 minutes. You have a crown in, 45 minutes if you're really good. Now, in all reality, at least if I had a practice and if I was a dentist, you're going to spend more time, or you're going to make more money spending time with the patient in the chair than you are with the computer and the 3D printer, right? You're going to have your assistant doing some of this work for you. And that's where it makes sense. And so, if you have an in-office laboratory, or your hygienist or your assistant doing this work after, like maybe you go in and help with the design or overlook the design, and they go ahead and perform the print and they do the wash, and then maybe at that point they bring it to you just to do some characterization or a little bit of like a lacquer on top of it, or whatever it is that you want to make it, luster and pop. Then your time that you're actually putting into it may be 15 minutes or 10 minutes. But I think the most successful clinician will be utilizing their assistants for that. It just makes sense.
I totally agree with that. I always say digital dentistry is all about delegation, and it's a team sport. And most CEREC users know this. What you described is exactly what I do in my practice, in that I prep, I scan, either me or the DA will design, I overlook the design, make sure it's perfect, and then the rest is basically completely done by the assistant or the practice manager or whoever you have trained up to do it. And I think that's the beauty with digital technology, is that the post-processing isn't that hard. I still have some reservations about, how much can you actually polish a resin compared to what a glazed ceramic looks like. A glazed ceramic is just a different beast in terms of longevity of the shine, how well it shines. But it's like you say, look, it's a materials game, and who knows, in 2 to 3 years, we might be having another chat and everyone's printing now.
Yeah. Absolutely. That'd be wild. We should put this in the books for 2 years from now and have this reopen this conversation. And it'd be like a time capsule. That's what you need to plan, is plan a time capsule, and we'll come back we'll come back to this.
And be like, oops, everything we said was wrong. It's all changed.
Right. I hope not, but that'd be pretty wild, right?
Yeah, I hope so too. I guess, look, we have a couple more minutes left. What are some other interesting things happening either with you or the company, or, some things that you can share, what's going on in the 3D printing space, or with Asiga? I'd love to hear it. And kind of what you think how digital dentistry technology will change in the next 5 years.
Absolutely. So at Asiga, we're constantly evolving and working on next generation software and looking how can we make our equipment more advanced. And like we discussed earlier with the ultra gloss trays, and we're always looking towards the future. And something that we're really focusing on is how do we make our end users' lives easier? And that's why we developed the ultra gloss tray. And so everything that we do is going to, moving forward, is all about simplification and just making the processes and procedures seamless and easy. And so the future at Asiga is bright, and it's extremely exciting to see what all we have planned. Just for overall, digital dentistry, it's continuously evolving. And the best thing to do is just watch the chemistry game. And if you don't, if anybody that's listening doesn't have a 3D printer yet, start looking at it, because it's something that you're going to want to incorporate. I had a conversation with somebody a couple weeks ago, and we were talking about like how fast or how long does it take to recoup your expense for getting a 3D printer. And I think it was 20 splints. Within 20 splints, if you're a general practitioner, you can have your Asiga Max paid for and your wash and your curing unit within 20 splints for 20 patients, which that's such a small number, right? And it's just going to continue to evolve in that way. It's just overall amazing. And something I'm pretty excited about is the next gen materials that will continue to get better. And it's just going to be a fun ride all the way through. And it's really limitless at this point.
Yeah, look, I totally agree. And I think to take that further, I almost think it's a no-brainer, almost kind of like where having a scanner is at right now in the world with the mass adoption, where most people just agree that you need one. I think a 3D printer is going to get to that point very soon. Yeah. Not just because of the cost, but it's like you said, I mean, most clinics have that stone room at the back of the clinic on the off chance they need to, have a model in some way. Well, if you're using scanners for everything you do, some days you just need a model. And I think it's just going to be a no-brainer for most practices to have one.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
But on that note, look, Corey, I really appreciate your time. I'm sure you're a busy man once again as a GM of Asiga America. I appreciate your time today with us, and thanks for having a chat. And I will take you up on that offer. In 2 to 3 years, we'll touch base again and see what's changed and how it compares to what we talked about today.
Absolutely, Doctor. And thank you for your time today. And I really appreciate it. It was fun chatting with you and learning about what you do, and just overall in offering this podcast for so many different viewers out there. This is phenomenal for anybody to take in and learn from. And hopefully, I'm sure your subscriber list is growing, but if anybody's not subscribed, it's silly. They should be listening to what you're doing, because it's amazing. It's amazing.
I appreciate it, my friend. And I do really want to give a voice to the industry leaders and also the people that work in the companies, right? Like oftentimes we get so many KOLs and dentists having a chat, but what I've learned from jumping around companies and having interactions with companies is that the guys that actually work in the companies know a hell of a lot, like we sometimes forget that. These are the guys that we can learn from and get insights because they're looking at the market so carefully.
Right. Absolutely. We got to see which way it's going, for us to be able to predict our futures. So we try our best.
No doubt. And that's it for this episode of Digital Dentistry Decoded. Thanks so much for listening, and thank you, Corey Lambertson, for joining me today. If you enjoyed the show, remember to rate and review us wherever you get your podcasts. And be sure to sign up to our free digital dentistry courses at instituteofdigitaldentistry.com. And follow us in your favorite podcast apps so you can listen to our next episode. Coming up next time on Digital Dentistry Decoded, we sit down with Ayush Bagla, CEO of the up-and-coming dental 3D printing company, Accurita. Ayush shares his unique background pivoting from 3D printing metals for jewelry to leading innovations in digital dentistry. We take a deep dive into the advantages of LCD 3D printing technology versus DLP and why Ayush believes LCD is the future. Plus, Ayush stresses the critical importance of post-processing for accuracy, mechanical properties, and biocompatibility. And with lots of new products slated to launch this year, including a game-changing nitrogen generator, Ayush gives us an exclusive sneak peek into Accurita's roadmap for transforming restorative dentistry through 3D printing. You won't want to miss all of Ayush's valuable insights into the key trends that will shape digital dentistry in the years ahead. The digital dentistry revolution continues, and we're here to keep you at the forefront. You've been listening to Digital Dentistry Decoded, and I'm Dr. Ahmad Al-Hassiny, helping you stay ahead of the curve in the dynamic world of digital dentistry. Thanks for listening.